I think the gallery system as well, from what I've seen and what I've learned from all these experts in the space, is that unless you're at a top tier gallery, for the most part, you're being represented by a gallery who's also representing another, could be up to 20 artists. They tend to not even necessarily have time to even push your work to any sort of degree. So you have to champion you. And so that's why I kind of, again, I'm, I guess, bullish on creating your own path as opposed to being tied up in that system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is like the answer to everything, which is you have to champion you. Like that is every artist should get that into their soul, that no one's gonna do the work for
Yeah.
you. If you're lucky enough that someone comes along and says, "Hey, I'm gonna push your work," you just paint. But mostly, you have to prepare yourself to champion you. Welcome to the Paint Method podcast. Those of you who are coming back, welcome back to you that have been following this new journey of the Paint Method, which is about passion, action, intent, new, and teach. These 5 pillars that I sort of look back on my creative journey, and these pillars have helped get me to where I am today. And, this is also, I want to reiterate, this is a mindset podcast. We're not here to give you tutorials on how to paint, but how to apply these pillars. Now, it feels good to be back also in the studio. I took a little break. I needed a little unplugged vacation with the family. So we got away for a little bit, but we're back in, plugging in. We've got a lot of live shows coming up. And also over the next couple of weeks, we'll be recording a lot more podcasts. So definitely look out for those. And also, before we get into the podcast, those of you who have been enjoying these on any podcast platform that you've been listening this to, be sure to follow this podcast. So anytime we have a new episode, it'll pop up for you, and we post weekly. So I don't want you to miss those. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button to get notifications when we post new podcasts. And you can also hit the little notification bell as well so that you never miss a Paint Method podcast. I want you to envision this real quick, because this is how, I don't know how I could best set up this guest today, but just envision this story. Imagine an artist starting out, and they begin to experience some local success, painting. And then imagine this. Imagine someone just walking up to this artist's door, knocking on it, and the artist opens it, and this person says, "I love your work. I want to represent you. I want to sell it for you. I'm going to promote you. And all I need you to do is just paint." That's it. Just sit there, just paint. I'm going to do all the work. So that never happens. That also did not happen to me. It didn't happen to our guest today. The best way I could describe Laurence M. White's journey is, you champion you. You are in control of your brand, of your journey, of not only what you create, but also how you share it with the world. And not only is Laurence an incredible artist, but also you'll hear an incredible mindset of an entrepreneur who is doing all the work that it takes to get his art out to the world. Let's welcome our guest today, Laurence M. White. We are all on our paint journey, but where are we now? And where do we go next? This is how. Passion, action, intent, new, teach. This is the Paint Method. We know what's interesting is we met on Clubhouse in 2020. And the way that I came across you was I was looking at NFT rooms naturally, because I was like, what is this world? And then I started popping into like these fine art worlds. And I was like, I didn't even know this was on Clubhouse. And then you're on there like masterfully curating these rooms. And then obviously I dived into your art, but what's interesting about that is I went in your backstory, you had a background in TV.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Was that the original dream before you went into the art world?
Yeah, I mean, so I was in TV for, was it 9 years? Kind of worked my way up from a runner, which is like the first position you have, making teas, coffees, or whatnot on shows like The X Factor, Britain's Got Talent, and but The Apprentice, a whole bunch of other programs and stuff.
Yeah.
And kind of worked my way up to become a producer. But along the way, because of the freelance nature of TV, I found that I had quite a bit of time in between the shows that I did and all that kind of stuff. So that eventually led to me doing a whole bunch of different side hustles. And someone eventually was like, "Well, have you tried painting? Can you still do it?" And that kind of led me to my first piece there. And so yeah, kind of
Wow.
in a roundabout way, got back into it.
Yeah. So you started when you were younger. Then there was an original passion or foundation there already.
Yeah, I always knew that I was, I guess, good at art. Like, when your stuff's on the walls all the time, or like in school, or not dropping a mark during, over here we have A levels and whatnot. Like, so I understood that I was maybe, I guess, better than your average artist
Yeah.
at school. But then once you leave college here, and then go to university, it was kind of time to get like a proper degree, yeah, and get real about about life, and so just gave it up, and then have a 10-year hiatus from doing any art at all. So
Wow.
it's only in the last 3.5, going on now 4 years, that I've actually jumped back in. And but in a way, all that networking and all the people that I met along the way in TV have kind of helped build the profile, and get to the kind of people that I've been able to get my artwork to.
Which is why you have a successful trajectory right now, because there you've know that, and you know this, you can probably touch on it. There's so much more than just doing art. And I get frustrated because I see these amazing talented artists that are 1,000 times better than me at the skill of painting. But knowing that you've got to put it out there in some format, or you have to make a connection with people. Like, did you realize that right away? Or is that just a
Yeah.
natural thing? Like, no matter what I'm doing, art, or if I was a mechanic, or, behind the scenes on TV, that you have to connect with people.
Yeah, I mean, I quickly understood what I think. Once you're around, I guess, celebrities and people that are on, in front of screen, you realize that they're sharing their whole lives on this thing called social media, and they're not doing that for nothing. It's not only just about clout and all that kind of stuff. That does turn into real business results, in the form of brand deals, all manner of partnerships, and all that kind of stuff. So what I realized is that I could leverage that to be able to sell the product. And I actually studied business at university, so it was kind of a very natural fit. And I kind of, similar to yourself, I guess, understood that the art is actually literally just a small part of the puzzle to becoming at least a successful artist, in terms of commercially being viable to sustain yourself and whatnot.
Yeah, and I think that that extra part is making a connection, and to do that is not just showing your skill set, but also your mindset. Like, how do you think? Like, what what things make you sad or happy, and finding a way to communicate that, through somehow, some way. So, a lot of your work is, they're like icons of culture. Whether it's entrepreneurs or footballers or any other celebrity. Was that the first subject that you sort of went after, or did your subjects evolve into that?
Yeah, no. So we're kind of kicking back to the kind of story where I was doing TV work, and then I was asked by a friend to kind of see if I could still paint. And so that led to me doing a painting of Kanye West. There was no rhyme or reason to it. I'm just a fan of Kanye West, despite what people think about him. But I'm just a fan of him. And that led to a painting which I did. And it happened at the time, my friend had just got onto a TV show, and he ended up buying the piece, posting it, and then that led to other, I guess, people seeing it, other celebrities seeing it. And then what I then worked off for the first couple of years was just commissions. And so often people would ask for those types of people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And even aside from branding very well, by the way, because your style, these icons are all created in this sort of grayscale, black and white. I think of like these classic portraits. Uh, was that intentional to start creating portraits as black and white and not introducing color, or did you start off differently?
Yeah, yeah, well, it's funny you say that because I started out differently in terms of I started in color. I realized being out of the painting game for like 10 years that I had to get back to basics and not necessarily worry about color, and actually just get back into working on the craft of painting. And even now there's still a long way where I know I can get to in terms of making something look as realistic as possible, but I felt like the first step was to master that, and then the color will come with time. I also knew that, and I guess maybe this is the more business head of side of things, painting in black and white is going to be the more, at least for me, it was the more commercially viable, because you're not only are you producing portraits of icons which someone's got to like, if they've then got to like the color scheme as well, you're just niching down too much, in my opinion, your market. So just doing it in black and white kind of, I believe, opens up the biggest possible market for that portrait. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're a fan of
Oh
them,
yeah.
well, a black and white piece, is pretty. What's the word I'm looking for? It's like inoffensive.
Yeah, but also it's this I do portraits all day long, and it's always so hard to find the right tone or the right hue of skin tone for some people. And so by doing black and white, you're really focusing on the value of like the light and shadow that makes up that person, which is actually really difficult to do. There's a reason why I use color, because I can lean on that. So they're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I guess that kind of looks like that person. But black and white is just straight up structure, shape, light, shadow, and you got to nail that. I mean, perfectly.
But as as I introduce more and more color, you do realize that people are reacting to it more. I definitely think color evokes an emotion. Um, so yeah, I mean, it can work both ways. That's just kind of how I've started off doing it. But I mean, maybe I guess to kind of what you've done, I'm beginning to move into abstract pieces, not only because I want to try something different, but what I realized is that, I guess, along with the whole kind of business philosophy of things, just like you, I guess, you're able to produce a lot of work very quickly. And actually, I
Yeah.
think that actually producing a lot at scale is one way to be successful, at least what I'm finding in the art world, which is, whereas painting a portrait, which would take maybe 2-3 weeks, that's a lot slower. And I've been successful so far doing it. But over the long term, to kind of really push things to that next level, I think that producing work at scale is the way to do that through abstracts.
Yeah. So you're based in London, correct? Or is it outside of London?
Yeah, just outside, but yeah,
Just
pretty
outside,
much
yeah.
London. Yeah,
Well,
so.
what is the art scene like there? Like, is there are you sort of aligned with more of a fine art crowd, or is it sort of like is there a street art crowd? Like, how do you maneuver in a global city like that as an artist?
Yeah, so I mean, that is why, and I guess we'll come on to Clubhouse at some point. Clubhouse has been a godsend because prior to that, I would go around to galleries just myself, just out of pure interest and learning. But actually, prior to Clubhouse and now Twitter Spaces, there wasn't actually a place to learn, or at least congregate with other like-minded people at scale. And so that's why putting together, just out of pure intrigue as to how to make it as an artist, and then it kind of led to NFTs. But that kind of inquisition led to me connecting with a whole bunch of other people from the fine art world, and they've gone on to become my friends. And I now go to galleries and kind of learn about the art world through those people, if that makes any sort of sense.
Oh yeah. And then do you feel embraced by them? Because I hear a lot from artists, and I kind of feel this way too, because my art is not it's more of like a pop art, but I don't necessarily find myself fitting in with the traditional art world. But do you feel embraced by that world as you connect with them more, or do you kind of find yourself like, look, I'm a person, I just happen to be an artist around the crowd that I hang out with?
It's mad you say that because I always the gallery system doesn't make sense to me at a point, because if you can build a big enough social media audience, there you can cut out the gallery, because if they're taking roughly 50%, let's just say for ease in this
Wait, say that
example,
again. Say that again. How much do they take? Because people need to know this.
50 for the most part 50%
Yeah, that's a lot.
of all sales that you make.
Yeah.
And now, if you're selling at prices that are extremely high, then that can be valuable. But for the most part, you find that a lot of artists, even though they're selling well, if you've got to give away 50%, well, if you was to just do that, I'll use this example. If you was to sell a painting for obviously 10,000 for a gallery, well, you've only got to sell one for 5,000 through Instagram or whatnot, with less hassle, less control over what you're doing, to make the same amount of money. So until I'm at the point where the paintings are worth so much more, I don't really see the point of going into a gallery. And even that said, it is difficult to get into that gallery system in the first place, which I guess is why NFTs are exploding in such a big way, because it does cut out that middleman.
Yeah, and but that system works for the gallery because they're also selling, a large number of artists. So even with them, that's essentially their social media. That's their social contacts. So not necessarily people just walking in, but the relationships that they have with
Mm.
collectors, and then the vast relationships they have with artists. So we're limited to ourselves, and they're sort of open up, which is now flipped because we have access to collectors all over the world. And what's interesting is even the subject matter that you do is you found a way to connect with people through their passion. So whether it's the famous footballer or whether it's the musician or even a genre of music, you can tap into a niche by creating what they love. At least that's what I've found. Do
And
you choose that based on that?
well,
Like trying.
just circling back just quickly, and I'll come on to that in 2 seconds. But I think the gallery system as well, from what I've seen and what I've learned from all these experts in the space, is that unless you're at a top tier gallery, for the most part, you're being represented by a gallery who's also representing another, could be up to 20 artists in a gallery. So, and they kind of tend to be on very slim margins themselves. So they tend to not even necessarily have time to even push your work to any sort of degree. So you have to champion you. And so that's why I kind of, again, I'm, I guess, bullish on creating your own path, as opposed to being tied up in that system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is like the answer to everything, which is you have to champion you. Like that is every artist should get that into their soul that no one's gonna do the work for
Yeah.
you. If you're lucky enough that someone comes along and says, "Hey, I'm gonna push your work," you just paint. But mostly, you have to prepare yourself to champion you. I mean, and that starts too with a vision that you have. Starting off creating and envisioning yourself 5 years down the line. Like, how much do I want to be selling? What kind of work? What do I want to be known for?
Yeah, and I think, and sorry to jump in there, but I think it
Yeah.
actually comes down to what you want to do. Like, I look at someone who's been successful like yourself, and I'm like, yeah, you've got an amazing brand and are selling work and able to sustain a very nice and very good life off of your artwork. Whereas a lot of people that want to go into that gallery are trying to be represented because they want to be eventually in the art canon. And for those that don't know what that is, it's kind of like to be known in the history of art. And as much as I would love for that to be the case, I think that the way of doing that for me is to build the biggest possible audience who will remember my work, as opposed to having to kind of fight your way through the gallery system and kind of get past all the gatekeepers to eventually one day maybe get to any sort of credibility or kind of critical acclaim.
Yeah, I don't think it's an accident that artists like the Warhols and Dalis and Fridas are still talked about in quote unquote art books or history books. They were champions of themselves at that time, and I think that sort of has been looked over. I don't think that people really focus on that because they had a vision for where they wanted to be. It wasn't by accident. There are some, say like Van Gogh, who didn't become famous till afterwards, but at some point someone saw that as this is a brand that we can build over time and
Mm.
control and and create a narrative to it, which is what we get to do now. It's just that
And
there's
I
a lot
think as
more
well,
competition.
yeah, and I mean, I guess for this, maybe out of my own selfish question to you, and
Yeah.
I'll say myself, I have one marketing manager, someone who deals with my kind of all my social media, inbox, outbox, reaching out for collaborations, all that kind of stuff. I'd be interested to know how many you have in your team. But
Yeah.
my point being, and the reason I wanted to bring that up is that art is a business. So if you do want to become sort of, I guess, known at any significant level, eventually you're going to have to build out that team.
Yeah.
And that might start with one person who just helps with a little bit of admin, but before you know it, you might have someone who's dealing with logistics to get your prints out, or like you just mentioned at the very beginning, like it's someone that's going to help you with a whole NFT project.
Yeah.
There's just a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. So when I started, it was, let's just imagine this, 2003, I was just doing small live paintings in local jazz clubs. At some point, it evolved into a performance. And then it was still just me going and painting and showing up, setting up my own
Mm.
stuff. And I quickly realized that if I want to do more shows, that I need to invest an amount of whatever I'm getting paid, even if it was $500 at the time to just show up. I need to use $100 of that or $50 of that to pay someone to help me do this, so that tomorrow I'm not as tired and I could do another show. So over time, it was always about how do I sustain growth. And the reason why we're able to do 100+ shows, live shows a year around the world, is because of that thought of how do we do more per week or throughout the year. And that was, okay, I can't be on the phone booking, so I need to cold call and find agents. That's how it started. It wasn't like hoping someone's gonna come rescue me. Nope, I'm gonna go call someone, tell them what I'm doing, tell them what value I can bring them for booking me. And then it was just one piece at a time. So it was someone to just travel with me. And then it was an agent. And now we have we always have a studio manager here just managing this space. We've got Ray, that's helping produce these podcasts, because if I want to do 100 podcasts a year, I can't always be the one that's setting it up, doing that. But I know that in turn, because I've seen this over 20 years, with that mindset, eventually it does pay off. But what we're doing now is investing into people, investing into a system to be able to sustain growth. And this applies as an artist. This can apply as any business that wants to grow at scale, which you talk about a lot.
Yeah, I think yeah. I literally, I'm in exactly what you said there. Is like it speaks to everything that I think about when I think about art as a business and a personal brand. And I think that it can sound a bit taboo to talk about yourself in that way, but you are a brand as such when you become an artist. It's just how well known your brand is as
Yeah.
to whether that's the case. But I think that as well, for a lot of people that would listen to this, it can be daunting when someone looks at, say, so for example, yourself, myself, and to look at what they are doing. But starting out, you've been in the industry, what do you say, about 20 or so years. You
Yeah.
you didn't start out with a podcast. You fairly recently started it, for example, and people will look at that and be like, oh my God, how can you get that set up? Well, a lot has led up to that point where you can afford a team that's able to help you do that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And so I think for a lot of artists, it can be quite demoralizing when, you know, you're looking up to these people and not realizing that they've spent years and years and years to be able to
Yeah.
put themselves into position to do that.
Yeah, think about this. The first 4 years that I started this journey, that was like my college. So I didn't graduate high school. I didn't go to college. But the first 4 years, I had to pay for, that was my college. It was not having a consistent paycheck, not selling consistently, but building momentum. And it wasn't until after that 4 years of the momentum of relationships, where at some point someone I met 4 years ago is now coming back and saying, hey, we wanted to book you for that corporate show. Times that by however many people I wanted to reach out to in that 4 years, when I had nothing, when I was no one, but I was still confident in my vision and saying, look, the time and people I talk to now will eventually create a momentum that will come around. And that's still a shot in the dark. Trust me, like there was no guarantee. And I'm only saying this years later. But that's also why I'm saying this. And I'm saying that to the person that is starting off on their creative journey. Maybe you're the first 2 years into it and you're like, when is this turn? It starts with those relationships that you're building, connecting over time. That's the most important thing, along with making sure that in 4 years that your work has progressed, that you have progressed. So when they come around, they're like, oh man, I want to jump on this creative train. I want to support this. And eventually that momentum takes on a life of its own. And, but it started somewhere. It started with saying, I envision myself somewhere, and I'm just going to start step by step going there.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the 4 years, because I've heard about it roughly being 7 before you get any sort of
It could be
significant
that.
traction.
It could be
Sorry?
that too. It can be 7
Yeah,
years also.
no, but like, but I think, but having that business mindset and what you kind of described there from the very beginning, almost not fast tracked it, because I do think that not everyone is going to kind of hit 4 years and then automatically be, you know, catapulted into the limelight. But I absolutely hear the point, which is true. It could happen sooner for some people or later for others. That, you know, like you said, that sporadic painting sale and all that kind of stuff, you go through that, and it's just being consistent with it. Because, you know, especially life as an artist in the beginning, for the longest time, I kept my job alongside the artwork to be able to fund what I wanted to be able to make and do. And not a lot of people are willing to kind of put that time in once you've done even a 9 till 5 job, then to put in like another 3 or 4 or 5 hours till kind of 2 in the morning to keep going. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of a sacrifice though too that you were making to fund and fulfill this dream. You know, that's part of your momentum. Is as momentum's picking up, the reality of I've got to, you know, feed, I got to pay rent and so on, and even just the materials alone. So, you know what, I don't know if you can relate to this, but when I started, I made sure I charged enough just to sustain creativity, like just to make sure I could still paint. Do you price your stuff, or did you used to price your stuff that way? Or I think it's one of the artists' biggest struggle is, do you price it based on a cost or more value?
Value 100%. Because to give you an idea, and I would imagine, well, maybe not for yourself, but I spend about 70% of my time on social media, making connections, posting, replying to comments. Well, not so much reaching out to brands now, because that's, you know, Olivia, the girl that works for me, does that. But, you know, the majority of my time is spent on social media, building connections. And so the artwork is actually only a small part. So if I was to price by the time that I spent on the actual painting, I don't think that would be a fair representation of how much goes into the painting. That said, I do think, especially in the beginning, and even now sometimes, I will. It's a business, so it can be seen as an L if you do take maybe less for a painting than you might initially be willing to. But I think the name of the game in the beginning is to stay in the game by financially supporting yourself and doing that. So if you do have to do that or produce more work in the beginning, then I think that's kind of the price you pay to do the thing that you love, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And anytime you cut a price, the opportunity, the value of the opportunity has to be way greater than the value of what you're creating as well. And so, you know, we've done this too, where we've done giftings for different celebrities that will post it, and it does create a momentum that I couldn't do on my own. And so, but that's because the value of the opportunity was much greater than what I could sell that thing for, even double.
And I think what you just mentioned there, because I've done the exact same thing. So with the TV contacts that I made, for the first 2 years, I was painting for free for a lot of it, just giving paintings, pretty much every single painting that I did, away to a celebrity or an influencer at whatever level that I thought was appropriate. It didn't always have to be someone with the biggest following, but if they had the right following of the type of people that I would eventually want to get to, then that would still count. But doing that is basically networking. And so even just, you know, meeting yourself on Clubhouse, I see that as another networking tool. And you know, when I speak on this podcast, and, you know, someone might listen to this podcast, and that lead to a commission, or it might lead to nothing, but that networking that we're talking about is all part of it, but you can't necessarily quantify it at every single stage, which is why I guess it can be difficult for some people to get on board with that idea when it feels or seems like nothing's happening.
Yeah. And even to go on this point of the amount of time that you spend, and I the same, spend a lot of time on social media, whether it's on stories or even just creating the content for it. There's a lot of time put into this, and kind of shifting over to the NFT world is when I first got into it, there was a lot of time that was needed to be on Clubhouse, to be on Spaces, and it's real time. Like this is recorded. This can be played, time and time again by thousands of people. But in these particular Twitter Spaces, you have to be there. And I think that there's something special about it. And I don't do it enough, but you crush it in that. How have you really seen the connections grow by being in a real-time audio platform, being a visual artist?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first of all, I literally can't say thank you enough to Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces because it's opened up so many doors. I think until there was the kind of record feature, which I haven't started turning those spaces that I run into recorded spaces yet, but eventually I'll get there. To be in NFT specifically, you have to show up and be in the space and be part of the community. Even if you're a celebrity, or a really well-known artist, yes, you will do well, maybe in your first sale or your first project, but you really have to demonstrate value and a kind of a long-term scope to be successful. So just like you mentioned there, you do have to put in the time and put in the legwork to actually show up in spaces. But I quickly realized that the easiest way I found to do that, rather than go into all these different rooms and spaces and kind of put myself out there like that, what I've tended to do, and maybe what this podcast is doing, is actually you're bringing people to yourself and actually networking that way. So I create spaces in my club called Art on Twitter Spaces, where I bring the experts in from the NFT world, from the contemporary art world. And by doing that, people can learn, but ultimately as the host, you not only benefit from the knowledge that you take from that, but opportunities also come up, in your own artwork. And if you've got an audience or a community around what you're doing, then you can remarket to those people eventually once it's been built.
Yeah, and I love how you curate your rooms because I've been in them before, and it usually there's always like a title. Not that it's like a gaslighting title, but it's like, does fame matter in the art world, or does price matter? It's something that is topics that are widely discussed and also polarizing as well. But there's such a great, healthy discussion happening about this topic and it changes every day. I don't know how often you're doing them. How often are you doing the spaces, by the way?
Yeah, 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. Which, by the way,
Wow.
if I can just jump in, the problem with Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse is that they require you to be there constantly. So, for
Yeah.
example, for those rooms, I would need to be there. So that's 9 hours a week of my week that I spend on these spaces. And over the long term, that's not going to be sustainable, and it will turn into a podcast eventually. But for now, when, and for a lot of artists that will be listening who have nothing but time to to spend, I would say that is an effective use of time, if you don't already have an audience.
Yeah, I would say that again, is if you have the time, go do it. Like, I wish I had the time. I'm driving my kids around from school to like activities, and it's hard to be on spaces, during those. But if you can do it, please, like it, even just the small amount of time I was on there in 2021 is I met people like you. I met, even Blake Jameson. I don't know. I think you guys may know each other, but someone who I just got to finally, hang out with in person in New York City recently. That was a year later. And there's numerous others that I was able to connect with just based on sharing conversation. And I think the value of presence, knowing that we all have a lot of things to do, but we're somehow finding this common ground in discussing what we love, which is art related, or whether it's NFTs, which is, the technology that, allows us for our art to live in a technical world. So, and what are your thoughts on that? I know you've done your Genesis drop in, you know, as an NFT. Long term, what do you see NFTs as in the art world, or benefiting artists?
I mean, for artists, it's an amazing piece of, I call it software. That smart contract allows you to receive royalties as an artist, I think is kind of the main beneficiary factor. And for me, you're able to build a community even further and a much deeper relationship with your audience, because you can send stuff to your collectors. You can, provide utility. With the NFTs you provide. So yeah, I mean, it is the future. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a digital artist, but like you, I think that eventually it leads to a kind of much bigger project. Instead of just doing one of one artworks, it will lead to kind of, yeah, a generative project that I can kind of build out and or leverage my art community that I'm building on Twitter Spaces, and kind of market to those people, if that makes sense. But one thing that, if you don't mind, I'd put to you is that it's interesting you went with Nifty Gateway, because that would be, in my opinion, the equivalent of going with a gallery in real life. And you mentioned there that you kind of decided against the gallery system. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that's a conversation to be had in the world of NFTs at the moment, you know?
Yeah. So Nifty Gateway was an opportunity that was presented to me before NFTs even blew up. It was like early 2021. And I didn't even know what an NFT was. I just started researching
Hmm.
it. And Nifty Gateway had positioned themselves early on as in one of the best, biggest curated sites, along with Super Rare, which we also were able to onboard there early as well. But honestly, it was all sort of like luck, timing, knowing the right person. Again, the person that brought me in was not even from the NFT world. They were doing merch on the Kiss tour, which I was on for the year before that, and she was already plugged in with them and had helped one other artist. It went really well, and so she came to me and was like, she's like, look, this is new. I know this is different, but I think you could do well in the NFT world. And so we produced that first round of videos, and we produced them in a way that it wasn't like a social media video, and because we knew that the value, the payoff could be do really well, and eventually did. You know, it did really
Hmm.
well for the first time,
It
but
did really
also
well.
it
It
did
did
really well.
really
It
well.
definitely, but I would say this: the amount of time that I spent on Clubhouse and just doing those extra things that had nothing to do with art. Let's just say I probably spent maybe 45 minutes per painting. There was 4 paintings. You could probably do the math better than me. Let's just round it out at 4 hours. And I mean, I spent weeks, like 6 hours a day on Clubhouse, weeks leading up to that, even going on Discord as well, which I didn't know a lot about, but I adopted it, and now I get why. And so doing those drops, I mean, often, I mean, the reason why I'm doing one a year later is because the amount of time that it takes, and also I have to plan, just in my schedule. Like I need to set time aside just to
Hmm.
hop in on conversations on spaces. And it's so
Hmm.
funny, we talk about more than the actual work of the NFT. We talk more and more about the work that it takes to connect with that community. But it's absolutely important, and it's the only way you can be successful in that world.
I mean, I just want to, yeah, I was just thinking of something profound to say, but you've literally just nailed it on the head. Unfortunately, unless you are like an OG, like kind of in from the very beginning type person, you do genuinely have to just put in the time. And everything you spoke to there kind of speaks to me, and that is literally the way to do it. I think that for those that like writing and reading and whatnot, Discord could be a great place for you. I personally don't necessarily like Discord. I find it too. It's not very user friendly, and that's why in audio, where you can kind of build that connection, and it feels a lot more authentic when you're speaking to someone. You can hear someone's voice. That's just been the way that I've been able to build my community around that. But yeah, I think NFTs is a beautiful space, but it's becoming harder to crack. But I like what you said there, and I think that people are starting to do that, which is actually maybe take stock and actually think about what they want to do as a project rather than just trying to release any old piece of work
Yeah.
to try and cash in, you know?
Yeah. And then also to kind of double down on what we were talking about with galleries and even, large platforms like Nifty Gateway is you still have to, you champion you. I had to do that in that process. It was not a guarantee that the project would do
Yeah.
well because it was on Nifty Gateway. And you could say that as can't guarantee that my art will do well in insert popular gallery. It's you still have to add the value in who you are. You have to add the value in your art and why people should think it's important to put their hard-earned money into it. And now, as NFTs grow and there's these generative projects, which are really you can look at them like I was reading something last night, like these large generative projects are like the new startup. It's like invest into us. We kind of have an idea, and we're gonna figure it out. And that's gonna change because there's a lot of people putting money into those that are not seeing the payoff either fast enough or they just don't trust them. And so now, I think it's important to be very clear about what you're gonna do over the next 1 to even 3 to 5 years, which seems forever in NFT world. But I think that as time goes on, as you see, different security hacks on there, you see rug pulls, people saying they're going to do something and they don't, they just disappear. The more that happens, the more you're going to have to really be, keep your word in that world and say, look, this is what we're about. This is what you're buying into. And this is exactly how we're going to do it, even though things may change, but try to be as clear as possible. And I don't think that's any different with building an art brand at all either, or a brand. A brand is something and someone you can depend on. And, I think there's ways to figure that out as an artist. Right. Because you're not, you're selling a luxury item that people don't need. So they're investing into you, and you have to brand and say, well, look, this is what I believe in. These are the charities that I support. This is the subject matter that I, want to create, but it's still a form of them investing into a bigger picture. Like you are the startup now that people are investing into with every print sale, every original sale, or anytime they show up to one of your events.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to kind of further and piggyback off the back of what you just said there, the roadmap means nothing. And for those that don't know, the roadmap is often what a project will describe as to what they're going to do once you've bought the NFT, the digital artwork, as to what they're going to do, what utilities you might have. And their plans, but that's almost as good as a business plan, which these days doesn't really, I believe, count for much. I think that as we move further into 2022 and going into 2023, at some point there will be a correction. And I think that if you have a brand, and that's why again I still focus so much on the social media side of things, because I think that will be important, because when kind of the floodgates open and the world is onboarded and understands what NFTs are, they are going to look to invest or buy NFTs of their favorite artists, but also artists that they trust, as opposed to these projects and people that have only been in the space 5 minutes and are claiming to be either experts or projects that have got this long-term value. I see it as kind of, artists like yourself, myself, people that are putting in the work kind of day in, day out, that will actually be championed in this space, because you will be able to demonstrate that you're not just here to turn a quick buck, because there's now so much money in the space all of a sudden. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, as artists, let's just take the NFT part out of it. If you're creating and you want collectors to back you up over time, I think it's important that you owe it to your original collectors and past collectors to still grow. And that's as an individual, that's your skill set. Like that's just something that has to happen regardless of the form that you put it out into the world. And that is your way that you can build trust over time, and what ultimately builds a career over decades, hopefully beyond this life.
And I think what you said in there, the formula to success is time, hard work, and consistency.
Mhm.
and that equals results. And I think that you just described there the consistency part of the equation. And showing up on a podcast all the time, or like you mentioned, they're doing 100 shows in a year, or me doing 3 spaces a week, or putting out a post every single day on TikTok, all the different LinkedIn, all the different platforms.
Yeah.
That consistency, if you can keep doing that, it is my belief that there is no way you can fail, because that demonstration of dedication and networking will kind of pay off, whether it be, like you said, the 4 years or longer, or maybe even shorter.
Do you apply that way of thinking to your creative process? Like, you have your space set up to sort of like maximize the amount that you create, or how often you can create? How do you apply that mindset to your actual creative process or creative space?
Yeah, so I think spending more time on the art almost comes down to the more business side of things. Like you begin to outsource like the admin type tasks in your day, so that you can actually spend more time on the art. Um, Consistency obviously is that doing it every day, and the time part is actually one of the hardest parts, I think, because like you said, becoming an artist is a real emotional roller coaster. And there's times where you don't feel like it, or you've just had a show, and you don't necessarily feel like doing anything again, or there's going to be these moments, and it's just keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it.
Yeah.
And it's such a mental game. But in terms of applying it to my practice, yeah, I mean, just doing it kind of, for me, it's like 6 7 days a week.
Yeah.
That is a kind of my process of working on the artwork. Just doing it pretty much. Well, no, not pretty much. Literally every day. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but just trying to do a little bit, it really does help.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Now, the name of the podcast series is called The Paint Method, and it's based on what paint means. It's these pillars of what I believe are a creative journey. Passion, action, intent, new, and teach. And that intention part is really more about, it could involve charity. It could just be, working for a greater purpose if you have a family or kids. Is there something that you feel like you're working greater towards? I mean, take the entrepreneur hat off and put on, maybe like a life journey that you're on. Is there like a bigger purpose that you see or feel that you're working towards?
I love that question. I think that's a brilliant, brilliant question. In all honesty, I don't think I have a great answer for it. But the best answer that I can conjure up at the moment is a personal one, which is just to fulfill my potential. I believe that I am very good at painting portraits, and I just want to maximize, so that when you look back, I can say I literally did the most with my art talent, and got as far as I possibly could have, because I exhausted every avenue, put in as much work as I could do, and so you have no regrets. I think that on top of that, there is another level of kind of like purpose, but if I'm honest, I don't think I've fully uncovered that, to be complete. Yeah, to be
Yeah,
completely
and that's
candid.
and that's a journey. That's something that's part of the journey. It's like, you're very much like in action right now. You're like taking like daily action, like building right now, which is inspiring. Like, what, even just the energy of talking to you right now, it's like after this, I'm like, I gotta fit in like a spaces, time, or like I want to go create, because there's an incredible energy that's put into this, that's mentally, spiritually, physically, and it's hard to remove yourself from it when you're in it like you are right now.
I think, I mean, yeah, exactly. You literally just described the exact process. I've been at the studio all day, painting, creating content for social media. I then hopped on this podcast. What is it, about 7:30
Yeah.
in the evening over here in the UK. As soon as this is finished at 9 o'clock, I've got a 3 hour spaces, and then we do the same thing all over again tomorrow. And so it kind of takes that, I believe, to get to where I'm trying to go on to, because I feel like I've got a big goal. But there is ramifications to that, and you kind of mentioned your family there. I have a girlfriend too, and sometimes that does suffer, and so I do think there's a balance in there. But I think that I would even say I was still fairly in the beginning. Um, that there are sacrifices to be made, and I guess I speak of consistency. Well, it is being consistent whilst you still got to manage and make time for your family or your girlfriend or partner or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like that
Oh
all
yeah.
comes under that one umbrella.
Yeah, no, it's true, and that's part of the challenge. It's part of the beauty of this journey is learning that about yourself and learning what am I willing to sacrifice at some point, and whether that's time with family, which I've had to do quite a bit, and also it's this past taking a week off and just going on vacation as well and sacrificing time away from creating. And that answer is will show sort of ultimately down the road.
Do you yeah, no, I absolutely agree, but I guess when you're taking time off, do you feel like you not to question you, but I guess do you feel like you're almost missing out when you're not doing painting or something that's necessarily directly
Oh,
correlated to
absolutely.
your business?
Absolutely. Anytime I take off, I feel a guilt. I
Someone
feel a
else is
guilt that
getting,
I'm
yeah.
well, not necessarily. I used to feel that. So actually, I'm gonna address that real quick because before 2020, I was running ragged. Like, imagine for 15 years, you're traveling 250 days a year, and then I still even traveled for fun on top of that. And so I was just sort of like ran into the ground, and I was like, no one's gonna take my spot. That was my mindset. I was like, we're going to etch our name in stone, in history. And then when everyone took a break, I was like so relieved. I was like, I needed this time to breathe. And honestly, if it wasn't for that, the only other thing that would have taken me off the road would have been health, family, or something very, very serious. And so, which it would, this a world pandemic is still absolutely serious, but that time allowed me to think of new ways to communicate my message. It allowed me to develop new ways like this, setting up the production in the studio to be able to pivot and say, look, the next time there's a world shutdown, I want to make sure I have options. And so the time I take away now, I look at it like, look, if I'm spending time with my family, mentally, I need to also be thinking about, when I go back, I need to work and create a situation so that I can always step away and be with my family. And so I used to feel like someone's going to take my spot. Now I feel like the time away is actually spent
It's good.
for good for my spirit to build that and to know that when I go back in, I'm focused to create more time with them. And that's a personal intent for me. That's a personal purpose that I learned over time. And that's why I say ultimately your life will really reflect what's purposeful to you based on what you sacrificed. And there's no right answer to that. That's the beauty of, there's no right answer to say if you spent your life creating and you took time from your family or vice versa. And I think that that's about how you want your life experience to be.
Yeah, and I think maybe just I guess if I can speak to your situation, I guess in the at least in the very beginning of the pandemic, when everything is closed down, you probably had that comfort of knowing that no one else is necessarily taking that spot, as you mentioned that you kind of felt prior to that, because no one else was able to do that either, and then that kind of led to one thing, which led to another, that kind of thing,
Yeah. But I did channel that into TikTok. So like immediately I was like, what is this TikTok? What is going on here? Again, this is what we talked about this at the beginning of the podcast, which was starting from zero and knowing what that feels like and knowing that I'm going to win at this and I'm going
But
to be consistent. And so I would post like 3 times a day, like all this, like whatever content it was, and making sure that, and I would adjust the content over time. And then within 3 months, we had almost 2 million followers. And so now I'm like, I got to keep that spot. I got to keep working.
yeah. Yeah, and it's that same deal. I mean, I haven't got to two. I think I've got 125,000,
That's
so not two
amazing.
million yet.
That's amazing though.
Um, But yeah, I remember that you know you start on a platform like that, and yeah, you put again similar to you, kind of posting literally 2 or 3 times a day because that was literally the way to do it. Like you know
Mhm.
to kind of get that audience. But I think what will be really interesting is that people that have built a platform, maybe influencers, maybe artists that have got big followings just on social media, maybe Instagram is kind of where I'm angling this at.
Mhm.
I think it'll be interesting to see how many people are willing to put in the effort and pivot when it's not so easy. For example, like, you know, you kind of mentioned about starting again from zero on TikTok, as did I. But there are a
Yeah.
lot of people that won't start a TikTok because they have had it too easy for too long and don't want to put in that work to start at zero. Like you see with a lot of celebrities, they don't want to jump on something and to be seen to be at zero again because it's not good for their ego, or they can't be bothered to put in that type of work. And I think that as we move into a Web3 world, there are going to be a whole bunch of platforms, decentralized social media, where you're going to have to build your audience all over again, or at least large parts of it, you know, because
Yeah.
not necessarily a lot of people will know about it in the beginning. And I think it's so there's going to be a real opportunity on top of NFTs to really, if you become, you know, a name on the new Instagram or decentralized social media, you're going to be set for life. And you've got Instagram and Facebook and all these platforms to look to as to why it's important to build an audience around what it is you do, whether that be baking, whether that be art, or whatever.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've seen people from just a year ago, you know, starting on Twitter with like very little followers. They were big into NFTs, but really it hadn't built up yet. And now they're like these mega influencers. I'm sure you know some of them in the
Hmm.
NFT world that have hundreds of thousands of followers now in a niche world. And
Hmm.
and so I don't know. I feel like ego keeps us from experiencing the beauty of growth and what comes with that. And that's the last thing that I would ever, you know, want to get in the way, because ultimately when you start from zero and you know what that feels like, there's things that you learn along the way too, to adjust and to, you know, to change, to know when to change things up as well. So it's just, it's part of
I
this
think
beautiful journey.
And I think as well, you spoke about going to, you know, when you were on the painting circuit at the very beginning and you were kind of networking and doing all that kind of stuff. I would apply that to social media as well. Just like, you know, whether TikTok becomes the platform of the day, which it seems like it's on its trajectory to do that. But, you know, if you were creating YouTube content, well, that fits nicely into TikTok, and then there'll be another platform or whatever. And all these kind of little nuances that you're learning along the way will stand you in good stead, I think, down the line. So you're learning little things that will, at the time, maybe seem mundane or irrelevant or unimportant.
Hmm.
But it's all those things that lead to that thing when you do get to that tipping point, or when everything does begin to come together.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I don't know how your time is right now. I know I know it's late there in the
Mhm.
UK. And so I just want to say, man, I appreciate you just taking the time. You are a very busy person, artist, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Even whether we're on Clubhouse or even like this, like you're just, man, you have a great energy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh no, thank you. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure to be on, and I think that it was great to connect with you on, back in the Clubhouse days. And I said, if you're doing that NFT release, you should definitely jump on the show over on Twitter Spaces as well, because yeah,
Absolutely.
that'd be fun to have you on there as well.
Absolutely. No, you'll definitely see me on there ASAP soon. And real quick, before we wrap this up, where can people follow you? And also, do you have any projects that you want people to watch or to look out for?
Well, firstly, my handle on everything is Laurence M White, so that's Laurence with a U, M for mother, and then White is in the color. But I'm kind of one for the soft sell. So
Hmm.
uh, once I'm just kind of trying to funnel people into following me, and then you
Yeah.
know the artwork speaks for itself, as opposed to any one project that I'm working on at the moment, sort of thing. So you can find me on that handle on pretty much any social media. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely give Lawrence follow. Not only does he create iconic art, but also, like you heard in this podcast, a mindset of an incredible entrepreneur as well. Very, very impressed, Laurence. Man, well,
Thank you, man. Thank
no,
you.
thank you so much for your time, and man, I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Yeah, great to speak to you, man, and thanks for having us on.
Always, thank you.